If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Welcome to another episode of Scotland Then. Today's stories are taken from the Sunday Post and the Scotsman on the 7th and 9th of March, 23rd of April and 6th of June 1971. Around about the time 16-year-old Diane Graham was murdered, her murderer was sentenced and her mother sadly passed away. And also from the Courier and Advertiser on the 12th of January 1971. There are a couple of stories that involve violence and murder against children, so listener discretion is advised. So let's get into this week's Scotland Then.
If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Before we go back to 1971, I just wanted to let you know that there won't be a new episode released next week, as we've been getting ready for not only CrimeCon in London on the 7th and 8th of June, but also for the True Crime Awards, taking place on Thursday the 5th of June, also in London, where Peter and I will actually be presenting the winner of the Outstanding Indie Podcast category. And Peter and I are so proud to be partnering with the True Crime Awards with our podcast business Clúireann, which means Thistlewave in Gaelic. We're really looking forward to both CrimeCon and the True Crime Awards. If any of you are coming along to CrimeCon, it would be great to meet you and have a wee chat. Okay, so let's go back in time to 1971. The first article that caught my eye came from the Sunday Post and was titled Diary of Death, which went on to say, yesterday people in Dundee were talking about the number of violent deaths in recent months, before then going on to list them. Although it didn't just include violent deaths in recent months, but also from as far back as February 1969, almost 2 years before 16-year-old Diane Graham had been murdered. Regardless, though, there definitely had been a significant number of murders in and around Dundee during that time period, starting on the 6th of February 1969, when 38-year-old Margaret Hepburn stabbed and killed her husband, Police Inspector Angus Hepburn, at their multi-storey flat at Burnside Court in Lochee, Dundee. Margaret was charged with culpable homicide and sentenced to 8 years. Then, just over a year later, on the 14th of February 1970, taxi driver George Nixon Martin's body was found in Kirkton Woods, Lookers, having been shot in the back and stabbed. 2 teenagers, 19-year-old Frederick Addison from Linlathen and 18-year-old Robert Grunwell from Dundee, were arrested and charged for the culpable homicide of George Martin and were sentenced to 12 years in a young offenders institution. Then, on the 31st of October 1970, 1-year-old Elaine Helen McGee died from head and body injuries inflicted by 30-year-old James Thomas. Elaine's murderer, however, was deemed unfit to plead to a murder charge, and he was committed to Carstairs State Mental Hospital. Then, on the 2nd of February, just less than a month before Diane Graham would be murdered, 62-year-old Janet Shaw was found dead in the Conservative and Unionist Association offices in Dundee, with a youth being charged with her murder. And less than 3 weeks later, 33-year-old Elizabeth Jeanette McLean, or Findlay, was found unconscious in the entranceway to the Kinloch Arms Hotel in Magle. Sadly, Elizabeth died shortly afterwards. Although her cause of death was not disclosed, an unnamed man was arrested and charged with her murder, and he was due to appear in court. But it would be a murder that took place on the 11th of January 1971 that intrigued me the most, and that's because it's still unsolved to this day. And retired Dundee Police Sergeant William McFarlane said that this is one of the area's biggest murder cases. So let me tell you about it briefly, see if it jogs your memory, as the same retired sergeant believes that someone out there knows what happened, but that it might be a deathbed confession that finally solves this murder. 52-year-old James Keltie, who was the proprietor of the then Muirton House Hotel, died in Dundee Royal Infirmary after sustaining severe head and body injuries, with it later being discovered that James had suffered a fractured skull, which had caused severe bleeding to his brain. James had been found 2 hours prior, bound, gagged, beaten and unconscious on the floor of the hotel's garage, wearing only a string vest and his underpants. It was believed that James, a father of 3, had been attacked in an upstairs bedroom of the hotel and dragged outside to the garage. James had last been seen by his wife Agnes, a police officer at the time, about midnight when the pair went to their separate bedrooms. Following James Keltie dying, a murder inquiry took place, and it was found that phone lines at the hotel had been cut and that a window downstairs was unsecure, and so it was assumed that robbery had been the motive. Although William McFarlane, the retired Dundee sergeant, wasn't convinced, as no money was taken and only a few bottles of whiskey were missing. 2 iron bars had also been found nearby, and it was presumed that these were the murder weapons, although this has never been conclusively proven. This was a huge murder inquiry, being dubbed the largest ever held in Perthshire, with every male over the age of 16 in Blairgowrie being fingerprinted, with this being extended to other areas, amounting to 2,000 sets of fingerprints being taken, but to no avail. William McFarlane did say that he didn't think the murderer or murderers had been anyone living in Blairgowrie, that although there had been a few rogues and rascals, he just didn't believe this murder had been committed by anyone local, as he believes that if James's murderer or murderers had been local, then they would have been discovered. A description of a man aged between 26 and 28, wearing a khaki jacket, who had been seen near the hotel at 4:40 a.m. on the morning of the attack, was released, along with a request for the driver of a cream-coloured car who had been seen in the area also to come forward. However, nobody ever did come forward with any information, and the murder inquiry slowly became a cold case. James Keltie was said to have been a generous man who gave to good causes, who was fond of a drink and had a reputation of being a big spender, often buying customers in his hotel drinks with large wads of notes. James had 3 children aged 16, 9 and 5, and a wife who sadly died in the late 1970s. It's not known what became of James's 3 children, but for them to have lost both of their parents relatively quickly together must have been devastating. Do you remember this case, or know anything that might lead to 52-year-old James Keltie's murderer or murderers being brought to justice? There sadly are more murders to tell you about that took place in 1971, but first a wee detour from Dundee to Glasgow for an act of kindness that resulted in a death. 46-year-old Robert Mohammed was working in the grounds of the Belvedere Hospital in Glasgow, repairing a wall, when he saw 3-year-old Stuart Niven floating past him downstream in the River Clyde. Robert immediately jumped into the River Clyde and managed to push Stuart onto the bank, where passers-by pulled Stuart out. Robert, however, then appeared to get out of his depth, and he went underwater, and sadly, he didn't reappear. Despite a 100-yard stretch of the river being dragged with a grappling iron, Robert's body was not found. 3-year-old Stuart was taken to hospital and was said to be satisfactory. So we're staying in Glasgow for this next case, which does involve the murder of a child, 3-year-old Mark Beaton. Now, there's not a lot of information about this case, including who actually killed 3-year-old Mark. It only says that a 27-year-old woman appeared at Glasgow Sheriff Court after being charged for assaulting and murdering Mark after he had been found battered to death in a Glasgow tenement. The article in The Scotsman went on to say that police had been alerted when neighbours in the tenement phoned them after they had seen and heard Mark's older sister running and screaming from the tenement. When police had arrived, they had found Mark's body on a bed in the tenement, and the rest of his family had been located in a neighbour's house. Okay, so back to Dundee for this next story, which doesn't involve murder, but it does involve an assault on a 6-month-old wee boy. 24-year-old John Moran appeared in the High Court in Edinburgh on the 22nd of April, where he pleaded guilty to a most dastardly assault, and he was sentenced to 4 years. But just what had taken place? Well, John Moran was married with a child. However, since 1967, he had been cohabiting with Marie Hutchison of Craigmore Street, Dundee, with whom he had 2 children, one of which was 6-month-old Donald. John Moran was a former merchant seaman who was apparently of a nervous and quick-tempered disposition and had received psychiatric treatment twice in the past. He was said to, at times, have a violent temper which he was unable to control, and that his temper always seemed to get him into trouble. In early April 1971, 6-month-old baby Donald had been crying a lot, and Marie had been tending to him. However, on this particular occasion, John had decided he would go and pick Donald up to see if that would stop him crying. It didn't. In fact, Donald's crying and distress became worse. Within minutes, John's temper arose at the incessant crying of his son, and he became carried away and lashed out, striking 6-month-old Donald on the side of the head and fracturing his skull. In court, before the judge decided on a sentence, John's counsel appealed to the judge, saying that the assault on Donald had not been premeditated. It was simply a case of a man with a violent temper which he was unable to control. The judge in turn said that while he had kept this in mind, it was a fact that 6-year-old Donald had been in his father John's care, and he should have been able to rely upon his protection. And for that reason, the judge felt compelled to sentence John Moran to 4 years. I couldn't find anywhere what happened to baby Donald, although it did say that he had been assaulted to his severe injury. I'm not sure what that means, but I do hope he was able to recover from the dastardly assault and live a full life. Okay, one last story. A very different whodunit. The final article that caught my attention came from the Sunday Post on the 6th of June, and it was headed, "Wee Bandit Gives It Big Licks." Did you live in the mid-Craigie area of Dundee back in 1971 and enjoyed and frequented the ice cream van? Well, if so, this could be you. Apparently, a young boy, or the young ice cream bandit as he was being described, would hang around the ice cream van queues looking all doleful, thrusting his hands into the pockets of his shabby trousers until someone would take pity on him and buy him an ice cream cone. Grateful, the young bandit would happily eat this ice cream before running to the next ice cream van stop and repeating this same performance. The ice cream van driver thought that the young boy was managing to get 6 free ice cream cones a day. So come on, own up. Was that you? And that's almost the end. You can find an affiliate link to the British Newspaper Archive if you want to dig a bit deeper into any of this week's stories. Don't forget, there will be no new episode next week, and the following week I'll be releasing an episode from CrimeCon London. Just mini interviews with some fellow podcasters, content from some of the sessions we attend, and also wee chats with guests at CrimeCon who drop by our table. So don't forget to come and say hello if you're going to be at CrimeCon, and maybe you'll get to appear on the next episode. We look forward to seeing you there. We hope you enjoyed hearing these stories from back in 1971. If you lived in these areas at the time and remember the stories, or if you were the ice cream bandit, then get in touch. I'd love to know. But that's it for now. So until next time, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurinton.